Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. How was your lunch? Great, everything was good? Sudah kenyang ya? Alhamdulillah. Okay, that means we're all ready to start on the next session for today's forum. Before we start, can we please give another round of applause for Jakarta International Competition Forum. Thank you very much. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we will enter the second panel discussion with the topic of issues and challenges for competition enforcement in online platform. And now I would like to call on stage the panelists. First of all, Dr. Antonio Gomez, Head of OECD Competition Division. Good afternoon, sir. Mr. Bruce Cooper, General Manager of Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, or ACCC. Ms. Yin Yangling, Director of Anti-Monopoly, Bureau of China Ministry of Commerce. Dr. Sai Lung Hong, Commissioner of Chinese Taipei Fair Trade Commission. And for this session, I would like to call the chair, Dr. Chandra Satyawan, MM PhD. Dr. Chandra started working in the environmental business as an accounting staff. The head of finance of financial manager as well, controller at the contractor company, as well as for the field of building rentals and hotels. Since he started as a lecturer, Chandra has been involved in structural position as executive director, vice rector, until he finally became a rector at two institutions, namely the Institut dan Informatika Indonesia and President University from 2012 to 2016. Chandra was also a member for the Indonesian National Commissions for Human Rights, or Komnas HAM, for 5 years, from 2002 to 2007. As a person who is active in the field of human rights, Chandra has also been Executive Director of the Global Peace Festival Asia Pacific 2010. He is also one of the founders of the Indonesian Conference for Religion and Peace, or ICRP. He took his first PhD degree in Educational Management, and then he took his second PhD in Finance, specializing in Islamic Finance. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a round of applause for Dr. Chandra Satyawan as our chair. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, this panel objective decisions aims at providing perspective on practical competition issues in online platform from many perspectives, like common issues, enforcement challenges, merger in e-commerce, and economic analysis. These sessions will start with international best practices in competition issues involving disruptive innovations and big data, managing enforcement strategy, facing online markup. Issues will cross in merger and e-commerce, and challenges in competitions analysis in online platform. I will distribute the time of 10 to 15 minutes to each panelist. So we will start with Dr. Antonio Gomes. He is head of the competitions divisions at the OECD since November 2016. He has been president of the Portuguese Competitions Authority 2013-2016, having previously served as a senior competition expert in the OECD's competitions division since 2013. Prior to joining the OECD in 2013, he was director of the merger department of the Portuguese Competition Authority. Since 2005, he has been an assistant professor at the University de Aveiro, Portugal. Antonio Gomes holds a doctorate degree in economics from the University of York, UK, and master degree in economics from the University of York and the University Nova Lisboa. The second speaker, Bruce Cooper from Australia, General Manager of the Advocacy, Competitions, International and Intelligence Brand Specialist Enforcement and Advocacy Divisions. Bruce Cooper joined the Australian Competitions and Consumer Commissions in 1998. He's responsible for the divisions of intelligence and research functions, which seeks to identify emerging issues of ACCC, enforcement and compliance response, and the ACCC's policy and internal units. Prior to joining the ACCC, Mr. Cooper worked in a number of private and government legal roles. Our third speaker from people of Thailand, Ms. Yin Yang Ling. Ms. Yin Yang Ling obtained her Master of Law in Peking University and Bachelor of Law in the China University of Political Science and Law. She also studied at the University of Hong Kong as a visiting scholar from 2011 to 2012. Ms. Yin has been working in the Anti-Monopoly Bureau of the Ministry of Commerce of the Republic of China since 2008, taking charge of the antitrust review of the merger and acquisitions. Before 2008, she had worked in the Department of Trade and Law of the Hong Kong for several years. Our fourth speaker from Taiwan Fair Trade Commission. He is a commissioner, Dr. Hong Chai-Tung. Also economist. His PhD from University of Innsbruck, Austria. Master of Art in two institutions. One from Mannheim University, Germany, and MA Department of Economics, National Chongqing University, Taiwan. Experience as Senior Research Fellow, New Frontier Foundation at Taiwan, advisor Taipei City Government, and other positions. Let me start with the first speaker. So, Dr. Antonio Gomes will start with development of the competitions in online platform in some sectors, general and practical example on the enforcement in internet or online market. Time is Dr. Antonio.
Thank you, Chandra. I'd like to start by saying that it is a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank the invitation of KPPU, and I'd like to thank the chairman of KPPU, Sawaki Ralph, for this kind of invitation to be here. If I could have my slide located. They're over there. Okay, so I'll be talking about disruptive innovation, big data and algorithms. So at the end, I'll actually introduce a bit of the artificial intelligence that we've already talked about. Next slide, please. So I'll be talking about disruptive innovation, about competition and regulation in this context, then challenges to competition agencies, a bit on big data and the challenges that it poses, and also on algorithms and collusion. Next. So disruptive innovation, we've been talking a lot about it already this morning. It means innovations that drastically alter markets. It's breakthroughs rather than incremental technological development. And we see that disruptive innovation is allowing for new products, new processes, and new business models. Next. Is it new, really? Well, we've had several examples of disruptive innovation in history, from the assembly line manufacturing to the internal combustion engine to CDs, etc., etc. I would highlight as the main difference today is the pace of disruptive innovation. It's really the speed and the force of disruptive innovation. That means that regulators, competition authorities, governments need to respond much quicker than they used to. They used to have more time to react, and now they have less time to react because markets do change at a higher pace. We also see that a lot of these disrupted markets exhibit network effects that we have already talked about, and that means that the disruptors normally have a very rapid growth phase. And we see that disruptors also try to bypass intermediaries. We talked about that already. They try to reduce unnecessary costs, and they try to avoid regulation. And that's why then there's a call by incumbents that are resisting the new entrants for fair competition. Next, please. And this happens because often the disruption happens in sectors that are quite heavily regulated. We have disruption in taxes, in hotels, in financial services, in electricity generation, and even in professional services like the legal professions and others. So we see incumbents saying there needs to be fair competition. That means it needs to be a level playing field. What does it mean? Often it means that they want to protect the arena of competition that they had before, and they do not want these disruptors to enter the market. Next. So, regulations, are they still fit for purpose? And what we see is that often regulations themselves become obsolete because of the pace of innovation. And regulation may be themselves deterring and retarding entry in the market. And of course, if we see disruptive innovation as promoting efficiency, as promoting new products and services that consumers actually want to benefit from, then we see regulation can actually be preventing the benefits of disruptive innovation. But regulation may also be preventing the incumbents from reacting to competition, because they are forced to obey to certain rules that the new disruptive entrants are not obliged to, and they cannot react in the same way. So it is important to look at regulations. Next, review regulations. If I can ask for the next slide, please. It is important that governments, that regulators, and even competition authorities look at regulation and ask the fundamental question. What is the policy objective behind this regulation? What, in fact, are the market failures that the regulation is trying to address? What are the social policy objectives that it's trying to address? And if it's restricting competition and entry, are there any less restrictive ways of achieving the desired policy goals? And because of the pace of innovation, this means that we need to act quickly, and governments and regulators need to act quickly. And one note that I'd like to provide is also that you cannot only look at the digital world, but you need to see the restrictions that exist in the brick and mortar world. Because it's sometimes the restrictions in the physical world that are preventing the development of new digital solutions. Next. So this poses a lot of challenges to competition agencies. Challenges of advocacy, of course, because competition agencies need to be able to convey the benefits of competition to the different stakeholders. They need to develop market studies, to issue opinions and recommendations and so on. But also challenges in terms of enforcement. We've heard today that we may have, for example, incumbents that try to acquire disruptive firms so that they do not face competition in the future. But we have challenges because our merger thresholds nowadays are based on turnover, and sometimes these disruptors have not yet started having a significant turnover. So should we change the thresholds? Should we start looking at the value of transactions, or the value of the assets? It may also be difficult to establish harm, because sometimes it's even difficult to understand what exactly what is the business model of the companies that are being acquired, because they are still nascent. So that's a difficulty, a challenge for competition authorities. There's also a challenge of horizontal agreements and collusive behavior. I'll talk about that in a bit, on the use of big data and algorithms. There's an issue of abuse of dominance, because incumbents may try to deter other companies and foreclose the market for disruptive firms. But we also need to be careful, because the disruptors may later on become themselves dominant. So we need to also be careful with the behavior of those firms that gain market power, sometimes through the network effects, the economies of scale and scope, etc., etc. And of course we have vertical restraints that we've also talked about here today. Another challenge, next please. Another challenge that we have is international cooperation. We see that a lot of these businesses do not really have boundaries. We've heard examples here today of companies that are operating in Indonesia, but we know that a lot of these companies that are disrupting markets are operating across borders. So with these new and complex issues, competition authorities need to find ways to cooperate better and to deal with these issues together. They need to find ways to better exchange confidential information. They need to find ways to better assist each other in the investigation. They need to, for example, set lead authorities that will investigate an issue, and the other ones will then consider the decision by that authority. Of course, these challenges are not only to competition, so we are not alone. There are issues about taxation, consumer protection, privacy issues, product regulation, etc., etc. Next. So one of the challenges arises from the use of big data. And I would like to tell you very briefly about the 4 V's of big data. So we have volume, and now we have a greater volume of data than we've ever had before. We have velocity, which means that we can collect and process data in almost real time, which means that nowadays we no longer sometimes rely on forecasts, but we rely on nowcasts. Companies know what where the consumer is passing by. If they can show an advertisement of a shop that is nearby, it's because there is sufficient information that allows for an immediate response by service providers. We also have variety, and we see that operators are more and more collecting data from different sources, and at some point they know information on the consumer's age, the gender, the location, the household composition, the dietary habits, the biometrics, the preferences, etc., etc. And we also know that this information has value because it allows for product innovations and for efficient, productive processes. It allows for forecasting of market trends to improve decision making, but it can also be monetized. And we see that consumers are becoming more and more producers of data as well, and they become what we can call prosumers. So that is a challenge as well. So there are a lot of pro-competitive effects of big data. We should not forget them. Sometimes we only think of the risks, but it's a bit like with merger control. We know that in merger control, only a very small percentage of the cases are challenged. And I would say with all these issues of disruptive innovation, of big data, of algorithms, maybe only a small percentage will be challenged. But we need to be aware of the risks. And some of the risks of big data are enhanced market power. We know that there are economies of scale and scope in the collection of data. There are network effects. And there are also data feedback loops, which means that when you get data, you improve the quality of the service, then you get more users, which means that you get more data, which means that you then get more quality of service and so on. So one example is, for example, Waze, where the fact that you get more users allows the service to be even better. And there's a feedback loop there. So one of the issues for competition agencies to assess is whether the data that is being collected, is it an essential input for other businesses and services, or is it relatively easy to collect? It may depend on what markets we're talking about. We also know that there are privacy issues here, and privacy can be also considered by competition authorities as an element of quality when they are making their assessments. And so it's a non-price variable of competition. Competition authorities also need to take that into consideration. Next, please. So big data can bring, next. Big data can bring issues of anti-competitive mergers. There can be use of data to identify and displace potential disruptors, or there can be data-motivated acquisitions to reinforce market power. There can also be unilateral conduct, exploitative unilateral conduct by discriminating consumers, which can be good or can be bad, depending on the circumstances, but also exclusionary unilateral conduct or abuse of dominance, where companies may prevent access to essential data to foreclose the market, or they may identify threats and block entry. But there's also collusion, and one of the ways of achieving collusion nowadays can be through algorithms. Next. And that's my last topic, is really algorithms, and I'm reaching the end of my time. But I'd like to say that algorithms have also a lot of pro-competitive effects, a lot of benefits. It allows to predict market trends, to optimize business services, to customize services, etc., etc. And we see that the use of artificial intelligence and machine learning is allowing for better business. It's allowing consumers also to be better consumers because they have more information, they can optimize their decision making, they can increase their buying power, and also governments are using algorithms for example, to screen for cartels using electronic procurement data to screen for cartels, also using algorithms. So one of the risks of algorithms, of the use of algorithms, is that it may allow for a greater likelihood of collusion in the market, and because it changes the characteristics of the market. And maybe next, so that I can move fast. And mainly the characteristics that it changes are the market transparency and the frequency of interaction, which means that it may become easier for companies to collude using algorithms. And I'll give you some examples before I end. I'm almost finishing. Next. For example, imagine a company that intermittently sets a higher price, so signals that it's going to increase price just on a few seconds or microseconds. And the other companies that are monitoring the market realize that as this signaling and respond by increasing price to the value that was signaled. We can also have a company that decides to have an algorithm that just mimics the price of the leader. And the leader, because he realizes that that algorithm is in place, decides to increase price. We also can see a situation where a firm releases the pricing algorithm that it's using, and the other company simply downloads it and keeps and uses the same algorithm to set the prices. So there are various challenges, and into the way competition authorities can enforce in the case of anti-competitive practices. We can have situations next, and I'll go really fast. We can have straightforward horizontal agreements if we can find evidence that the algorithms were used to negotiate prices, etc. But we normally have situations of tacit collusion. Next, please, and next again. And there, competition authorities may need to use, facilitating practices and assertive practices, basically saying, looking if the algorithm has in fact facilitated the collusive outcome. But there are many instances where it is impossible to establish harm, and we have pure tacit collusion situations. In those cases, do we have an enforcement gap? It's something that we'll need to consider in the future. So I'll end, because I know my time is over, basically saying that competition authorities need to study these markets, need to understand in which situations harm to competition may appear, need to advise governments and regulators, but also need to be aware of the risks that this poses and be prepared for the future, because this is not in the long-term future. It's, well, I would say it's here now, and it's here to stay, and we need to be prepared. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, then continue to our second speaker, Mr. Bruce Cooper. He will explain about phenomenon in online market platform in Australia and the recent enforcement activities in such market, address important elements of effective enforcement strategies in anticipating development in online market. Time is yours. 15 minutes.
Thank you, Chandra. Selamat siang. Thank you to the KPPU for inviting the JICF to be at this important event, and for all the organisation that have been excellent. I'm going to talk today, as Chandra said, about some of the competition enforcement issues that Australia has had dealing with online businesses. And I think there are people in the audience with very wide background, and so for those who aren't competition specialists, just let me say why competition is important in this space. And open and well-functioning markets are vital to competition. And it's the competitive process that drives innovation, which is what we're really here talking about today. So without competitive markets, none of this is happening. And so the new methods of doing business do bring challenges for competition authorities. And what I'd like to discuss today are some of those challenges which face things like ACCC. So next slide, please. So competition and innovation always brings winners and losers. There'll always be firms who always use tactics to try to be that winner. Some of those tactics might well be anti-competitive. And businesses are always going to complain with the Competition Authority, whether that's the new entrant or the incumbent. And so it's to the Competition Authorities to know when to investigate. And it's a challenge to decide, one slide back please, and it's a challenge to decide when to intervene and only to do so where it's appropriate. And this striking the right balance is something that Hassan Kakaya mentioned previously. And in looking at restrictive practices, the Competition Authority must ask themselves a number of important questions, and they might actually indicate that you don't want to get involved here. So what is the effect of the practice or the restrictive practice? Is it pro-competitive, or are there efficiency arguments for that practice? How should we as a competition authority respond? How do we balance those pro and anti-competitive effects? Should we actually wait and see what happens, or should we intervene now? So no need to change the side. So just let me talk very briefly about the competition regime in Australia, which has many factors that are familiar with people who have competition regimes in their countries. The Australian Competition and Consumer Act prohibits certain arrangements, whether they're horizontal or vertical, that substantially lessens competition. It has prohibitions against the unilateral conduct or misuse of market power, and there are per se illegalities in relation to the most harmful types of collusive agreements such as cartels. But I indicate on the slide that Australia actually has a regime that allows us to authorise conduct where we see that there are pro-competitive benefits that outweigh the anti-competitive detriment. I won't talk about those any further today, but I'll be happy to answer any questions about it. Next slide, please. I'd just like to talk now about the first of the two cases I'd like to discuss, which is the Flight Centre decision. So this goes back a little bit of a way, but Flight Centre was Australia's largest travel agent, and 10 years ago it had more than 50% share of the booking market for international airfares for Australians. It had bricks and mortar stores, but it also had some online sales, and they obtained their revenue through commissions from the airlines. And they had, importantly, what I call a price beat policy, where they offered to beat the price of airfares offered by any of their competitors. And this worked fine when their competitors were other bricks and mortar travel agents. But that was before airlines started to use the internet to sell fares direct to consumers. And they could do that at a price that was lower. Next slide, please. So, as you can imagine, Flight Centre had an incentive to prevent the airlines undercutting its fares, and it attempted to persuade several of the airlines to stop selling direct to the lower than the price that the airlines were offering to Flight Centre. In some cases, Flight Centre actually threatened to stop selling the airlines airfares if they didn't comply with the request. And you have to remember that the market was very different 10 years ago. A lot of this conduct occurred between 2005 and 2010. The internet was quite new. E-commerce wasn't like it is today, wasn't as common. And there were none of today's big online travel agencies, which I'll talk about some of them later, like Booking.com or Expedia or Traveloka. And airlines only just started because the airlines were engaging in direct sales to consumers, and they were in competition for those sales with Flight Centre. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the case, at first instance, the agency won the case, and the arrangement that was attempted or was entered into by Flight Centre was found to be a price fixing agreement. Flight Centre appealed, and at the full federal court in Australia, the agency lost, and it was held that the company was actually just an agent for the airlines. They were selling tickets on behalf of the airlines, and they weren't competitors. But the agency appealed this to the High Court. So this case is partly why I'm talking about conduct that went back between 2005 and 2010. We had all these appeals. We appealed to the High Court, and in a recent decision, the High Court found, I won't read the whole quote there, but they did find that while they were acting as an agent, they were at the same time competing with each of the airlines, and so they had actually entered a cartel agreement to fix prices with their competitors. So this is an important decision, and one that I think is going to play out in Australia for a while to come. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to just turn to online travel agents, and by that I'm going to talk mainly about Booking.com and Expedia, two cases, two companies that are big in Australia. But similar, I know Expedia is here, similar to Agoda or Traveloka, I think, that are offering accommodation services where they're really broking between the customer looking for a hotel room on the one hand and the hotels on the other. And I've got a map, don't change slides please, I've got a map on the, so go back please, the map on the previous slide please, indicates that Europe, there was a lot of controversy about online travel agents in Europe. Thank you. No, thank you. The controversy there was about what's been referred to already today as cross-platform parity agreements. And there are a number of these sorts of agreements. There's a narrow parity agreement where the hotel is required by the online travel agent to offer prices and conditions that must be must not be better than what they're offering to the OTA. And a wide parity agreement is where the price or other conditions must be better or the same as that's provided to other OTAs. So Australia had terms and conditions that were being offered that were similar to Europe, and there was, I think, an expectation that the agency have a look into the competitive impact of those cross-platform parity agreements in Australia, and following the actions that were taken in Europe, and we did that. And we needed to decide whether or not we would proceed through the courts or an administrative type of solution. Next slide, please. So, in assessing the Booking.com and Expedia platform parity agreements, which were the wide variety, there were three competition concerns. First, that they restricted price competition between different platforms, so between Expedia and Booking.com or something, or between different channels, so online and on the phone. Second, that they restricted the ability of other rivals or new entrants to compete for market share by charging the accommodation providers of the hotels lower commissions in return for better pricing or something. And third, that they reduced the ability of the ultimate consumer to obtain competitive prices online. But there were seen to be some pro-competitive rationales for this type of agreement, and I'll just talk of one, and it's been mentioned already today, which is the problem of free riding. In the context of this online travel agency, the potential for free riding arises because the online travel agents are only paid if the consumer books the accommodation through that platform. And so free riding might occur if the consumer uses the platform to do the searching and then compares the prices on that platform and then goes and buys the accommodation somewhere else. And that was, Ikea mentioned that in relation to dress shopping as a problem in that area as well. And free riding can weaken incentive for investments and it can, if it's not taken account of properly, reduce innovation. So now let me look at the agency investigation. So we needed to understand the market in Australia and whether it was the same as or different from that in Europe. The way we did that was initially to run an online survey. We had about 500 responses. This showed that the issues were different for different sectors of the market, but it also made it clear that the survey was incomplete with generating biased results, really because most of the responses came from small hotel owners. Some of the issues that came out were that small hotels relied more on walk-ins or people coming in off the street, and they wanted to be able to price those at a lower rate than they were offering online, because that was a bigger part of their business. Medium hotels didn't care so much about walk-ins, but they did want to use their own databases of their existing clients and loyalty customers to run promotions and things and sell direct, which isn't permitted under some of the wide MFN clauses. And we just didn't get many responses from big hotels. So it was a really good way for us to quickly learn about the market, and it pointed to areas where we needed to do some more targeted investigations, which for us included some more detailed questioning of some of the larger hotel chains, engaging with the industry organisations, some of the software providers to understand how the online travel agent software was working, and which included sort of algorithms for determining where on the page your hotel turns up on a travel agency's website, and as well as doing some just monitoring of what prices we were seeing. Next page, please. And I think I'll skip that in the interest of time. Next, please. Next slide, please. So we've mentioned that previously that online travel agencies are two-sided businesses. I won't go through this in detail because we've talked about this as well. We've got consumers on one side, hotels on the other side. In assessing the competitive effect of conduct in a sector, you really need to look at both. But it's necessary to analyse each side carefully and, I would say, individually. The theory is that at least wide MFN harms the ultimate hotel consumer because they won't be able to get the best price of their rooms. But this harm is indirect because it's the consequence of the contract between the hotel and the online travel provider. And it's really important that we understand this side of how this side of the market works. And I can illustrate why it's important for competition agencies not to just sort of fall back into their normal mode of examining a market, because one of the important measures for competitive harm in a market is usually what's known as the SNP test, which is where you have a significant non-transitory increase in price due to the conduct of the business. But in this case, the price...
2 minutes.
Thank you. In this case, the price is the price that's paid by the consumer, and the consumer is not paying anything to the online travel agent. The online travel agent is getting their money from commissions. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the ACCC thought that the wide MFN went beyond what was necessary to avoid the free riding problem. And so what we didn't go to court, which is what you need to do in Australia to get a binding agreement if you think there's been a breach of the law, but we did get agreements from Booking.com and Expedia that is consistent with the agreements that were applying in most of Europe, that they wouldn't impose a wide type of clause on the hotels. So what this does is this enables the hotels to offer lower rates or better deals to other OTAs. It allows hotels to offer lower rates or better deals on offline channels, which would include, direct to their loyal customers and on their loyalty programs. Next slide, please. And so I just put this slide up as an example of an advertisement that's aimed directly at consumers to show how hotels can advertise direct to those consumers. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. So the narrow price parity agreement is still allowed in Australia, and so the OTA, or the travel agency, can require that the hotel not offer on the hotel's website a cheaper price than the hotel is offering the OTA. And so that is why you're allowed to have those loyalty programs. So next slide, please. I've got some information on this slide, which I'll let you read at your leisure, which basically says that the resolution that we reach in Australia is consistent with that applies in Europe, with the exception of the complicated situation in Germany, which is still under appeal. Next slide, please. Just two last things, very briefly. The ACCC is continuing to monitor the impact of the agreement on the hotel prices in Australia. There's evidence that some OTAs aren't complying with what they agreed to do, and we're looking into that, and there may be some further action in the future. Next slide, please. And finally, what I'd just like to finish on is that, to come back to where I started, the new ways of trade and doing business will bring new types of restrictions and new types of competition issues that competition authorities need to face. And these are going to change over time, and so competition authorities need to be aware of what's happening in the market. They need to understand that not every restriction is bad. Some might have pro-competitive or efficiency benefits. And it might take a little bit of time to work that out, but I'd suggest that is time well spent if innovation is going to be allowed to proceed. And to focus on restrictions to the competitive process. And finally, just to note that there's a lot of work that's going on around the world through the ICN, the OECD, and in many other jurisdictions. So if these issues are something that are pressing in your jurisdiction, there's bound to be some work that you can lean on from other jurisdictions. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper. So, ladies and gentlemen, the panel will continue by anticipating the future of competition online platform, both with the increase of global market, concentration through merger and acquisitions, and obstacles in competition analysis in the online market. Mrs. Yin Yanling will explain about the trend in merger and acquisitions in online platform, potential cross-ownership among startup companies in online platform, and their cases, performance, and challenges on major e-commerce. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm very pleased to join the panel discussion this afternoon. It's well known that the competition enforcement in online platform is a new challenge we authorities are dealing with. I would like to share with you about our experience in China, including the internet industrial development, the key features of Chinese internet industrial, and the challenges to merger control in the internet sector. Next. First of all, I would like to give the very brief picture of the internet industrial in China. Next. The internet has become one of the highlights of Chinese economy. The size of online platform economy is about 20 trillion RMB, which amounts to more than 10% of GDP. By the end of 2016, the population of Chinese internet users reached 761 million, top rank in the world, and the internet penetration rates in 53%. Thanks to the internet, the e-commerce in China has achieved rapid development and become an important engine of national economic growth in recent years. In the year of 2016, the size of Chinese e-commerce market reached 20.5 trillion RMB, increased by 25.6%. China has become the largest internet market and also the largest online retail market in the world. Next. Next. It has been more than 20 years since the internet was born in China. As of July 2016, the market volume of the top 10 online platform in the world has exceeded the first time traditional multinationals market volume. Chinese company owns 3 sets of the top 10, namely BAT, it means Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent. Next. Secondly, I would like to talk about some key features of Chinese internet industrial development. It's very important to look into it because we have to get to the point of industrial faster, and then we could make the competition policy and the enforcement rights working. Next, the first feature is that the leaders are both from the very serious competition. They are the choices of the market compared to the traditional industrial. The internet industrial is facing faster technology innovation and a faster product and service updating in the market. Once the technology or business model of the competitors feel behind, their products will lose the market very soon. Let me give you one example happened in China. Tencent's instant message application QQ, created in 1998, have many competitors from the beginning, such as ICQ, Chatroom, MSN, UC Talk. It now gets most of the market after fierce competition. More and more people in China are using WeChat, which is more multi-function. It is also created by Tencent. The second picture is the Chinese internet industrial is stepping into the new stage of development with the upgrading of consumption, industrial, and technology. For the consumption updating, nowadays people in China have more money in their wallet and they are asking for the products and the service with a much better quality than before. For the industrial upgrading, Chinese is pushing the lagging plus storage, which is to use the internet to promote the developments of a traditional industrial. For the technology upgrading, technology innovation has been the main source of the internet industrial development. We could see the next technology revolutions is coming, such as big data, analyze, and IoT. The third feature is that the competition in internet industrial will become more complacent. Next. The competition among the internet companies tend to fight for the time and attention of the consumers. They have to try best to enhance the consumptory upgradings. New technology is the power surge. Market entry will be more quickly and there will be more potential competitors arms for the cake. For the winners so far, like Tencent, Baidu, Alibaba in China, or Google, Facebook, Amazon overseas, they are now engaging in the competition in many sectors, both online and offline. Some of the traditional industrial are joined into the competition as well. In the last part of my speech, I would like to talk about the challenge to the merger control in China. As we all understand, the new feature of the competition in the internet industrial bring many challenges to the law enforcement. In the year of 2016, the Ministry of Commerce of China received 8 M&A cases related to e-commerce. All the cases were approved without conditions. The case refer to the industrial including electronics, retail, software, financial service, and other sectors. In the case review, there are some difficulties when we use the traditional merger control rules. The first issue coming to us is the calculation of turnover. The turnover is one of the thresholds of merger control. As we all know, the income of an online platform company is usually from charge the access fee to the platform. The access fee are typically charged subject to the certain percentage of the turnover of the shops on platform. Therefore, how to identify the business size of company based on the access fee or turnover of the business on the platform is a new culture overseas. Next, the second challenge is the definition of relevant market. Next, the diversity of online products is quite obvious. Products with same functions. Many provide totally difficult experience to the consumers. Even the online platform with the different functions, many compete to each other so that the scope of the market is become more ambiguous. What's more, the SNP may not be applicable in the internet industry. The decision by consumer to join the platform depends on the number of users already rather than the price of being a number of them. We could also see that the online business and offline business are becoming more and more competitive. The consumers find the price online and buy the products offline and vice versa. It makes line between online and offline much unclear. Next, the third challenge is that the market share is more likely not representing the company's market power correctly. The market share is the main indicator of market power when we receive the traditional industrial. But we have to put more weight on the network effect and the locking effect than market share when we look into the market power of an online platform. At the main time, we must not ignore the effect that drastic changing may happen to the market structure of the internet industry. Therefore, the traditional market structure analyzed basis on the market share is facing more challenges in the internet industry. As a conclusion of my speech, consider the new features that the internet industry shows up the challenge to the competition enforcement power. More studies on the competition issue of internet market are needed. The competition authorities should make a balance between the competition enforcement and the innovation protection in the internet industry. To achieve this goal, one of the ways is to make more cooperation and the exchange among the jurisdiction authorities, just like the four here, to good instance. At last, I would like to give my sincerest thanks to the host for his warm hospitality. It's very impressive. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we go to Q&A sessions, we still have one speaker. The last speaker in this session is Dr. Hong Chai Leung. He will describe about challenges in doing competition analysis and collecting evidence in online platform, including in assessing the relevant market, vertical, horizontal restraints, and impact assessments. Time is yours.
Thank you. Before I present my opinions, I will introduce myself. I'm Chai Leung from Taipei, Taiwan. So thank you for the marvelous and explanation for the KPPU. Thank you. So this page. So today I will show you this is my outline. The first
brief overview for this issue. Second one, I will bring some issues in Taipei, and I will show 4 cases or the 4 things in Taiwan. That's the point. I will show you the view, the current work, and the future outlook. I will show you now. We try to address these cutting edge issues. Next page. As you see, there are many synonymous terminologies. So-called digitalized economy, the digital economy, internet economy, online economy, new economy, platform economy. I think they are also pointing to the same thing, the same phenomenon. Some people say nowadays we are living in the age of data-driven or the data-driven economy. I think we are agree at this point. One of the most likely trend in competition law over the coming years, I can show you two trends. First one is the enhanced use of big data. In the cartel hunting and the concerns that companies can use big data to create entry barriers in online and digital markets. Second one is the most favored custom clause or the arrangement in online market is those for e-books and hotel booking. So this issue is not so new actually, but has received intensive attention recent days by various competition authorities. This is because the price competitions website has springed up like mushrooms, as you see. Next page. So something interesting is happening with the platform economy. You can see the case of Uber in many countries and Facebook everywhere. Alibaba in China and Airbnb in some countries. These are very brand new phenomenon. Next page. Typologies of the platforms are based on the types of resource they gain access to. They are divided into 4 categories. The first one is access to information, such as general search engines, for example, Google. Second one is access to personal data, such as Facebook. Third one is access to goods and services offered by third parties, such as online markets, Amazon, eBay, and so on. Next one is access to money or capital, such as crowdfunding sites or payment system, such as the MasterCard. Next one, please. Now I will show you the issues now in Taiwan we are concerned about. First one is the sharing economy. The case is the Uber. Second one is the e-commerce. This is a traditional issue, especially referred to the most favored nation growth. Second one is the big data. These issues refer to price discrimination and price collusions, even data protection, consumer protection, or the privacy. Another issue is the two-sided market. Many experts also have an opinion or have discussed about this issue. Next page. So Uber in Taiwan, February this year, February, Uber was ordered to suspend its operation by the Transportation Authority since it's illegal business model. After April this year, Uber's operates again only in Taipei, Taichung, and Kaohsiung, the three cities, big cities, by using a licensed commercialized driver rather than a private driver. So their business model has changed. So under the conditions of monitoring by transportation regulations, and so Uber also referred to the issue of the market domination. Some experts suggest that maybe we should skip the market domination and focus on the serial part, and see which stakeholder will be affected by the Uber's operation. And other competition concerns, such as the vertical administrative competition and the pricing policy. Next one. So I will show you two charts about search engines market in Taipei. As you see, the Google dominates the market. Second one is Yahoo, and the third one is the Bing. It's the built-in search engines by Microsoft. Next one. Chart. This one. Yeah, this one. Another chart. Sorry. This one. This one. Okay. Thank you. This chart shows that the digital advertisement market in Taipei. You see the search advertisement and social media advertisements both dominate the market. The statistics are stated to about 8 billion in Taiwan dollar. Next page, please. So later on, I will show you the two-sided markets definition and their features. So as you see, the two-sided market, there's one platform and at least two groups of consumer and others. So the most important point is the two-sided market is a network effect, not only in the production side, rather than consumer side, and they will have interactions of various demands among the various consumers group. Next one. Next one. Yeah. So two-sided market, the features could be as follows. First one is economics of scale, I have just mentioned in consumption. Second one is the network effect and the post-network effect. And their business strategies usually is the zero price structure. So this gives a big challenge to traditional definition of market, because the price signal now is not like before. Most of the cases are zero. So for the SNP test and other various managements of market definition now are in dispute. Sorry. This one. So now the point is that I bring the 4 cases in Taiwan. As you see, first one is the so-called RPM, resale price maintenance. This is more traditional issue. We have the water heaters case. And the second one is the most favored nations growth, online retail case. The second one is the abuse of dominance. We have the Google case. The first 3 cases could be regarded as restrictive competition case. And the next one is unfair competition case. Next page. So I will show the RPM case in Taiwan. With the big one is there was one water heaters company and its distributor were complained that they restrict the dealers' online pricing. So our finding and decision is that this company restricts the dealers from offering a discount price online by countries, which was deemed RPM according to Article 18 by our Fair Trade Act. So RPM now in Taiwan is under so-called rule of reason rather than say illegal case. So without justification, this company behavior would presume illegal. Next page. Second case is the case of MFA or MFC's close. Background is that we investigate whether companies B, online retail company, restrict its prior activities by countries most favored nations close. This is the price company B receive cannot be higher than these competitors. This is the definition of the minimum FFA. So our findings and decision is that big company did not ask its supplier for FFA clothes and not deemed in invitations of article of the Fair Trade Act. Strictly speaking, the evidence is not sufficient to verify company's business allegations. So our article 20 stated company or the enterprise cannot impose improper restrictions on its trading counterparts business activities as requirements for trade engagements. Next page. So now we have the case. We see the case of Visto dominance. Google. So you can see the background. Google was complained that it had removed game apps from the Google Play Store unexpectedly and without offering consistent standards. This is some charge. This one. So the finding is that the removed apps violates Google's developer distribution agreement and developer programs policy, either in violations of gambling policy or containing pornographic image materials. So in this case, Google was not deemed illegal. And okay, this one. Our decision also stated Google was also not deemed the price for the behavior discrimination according to our Article 20. This one. This case is about fair conduct. The background is the company P is the online information service was complained that it unauthorized accesses the information from other rental for housing rental platforms as the contents of its app. So our findings and decision is that company P secretes the effects of others, and this behavior was deemed obvious unfair conduct according to Article 25 of the Fair Trade Act. So we now go to the next section, the next paragraph. Next page. So how we to enhance our capacity to tackle with the new issues or the so-called building or the capacity building. We have 3 points. First is refer to organizations efforts. So you can see FTC in Chinese Taipei, we have 7 departments. One of them is Economic and Information Department. Next page. So this Information and Economic Analysis Office was built in 2012. It has 2 main goals. First one is enhance commission's industry data collection and economic analysis, basic capacities, especially in offline and the platforms for the network analysis. Second one is during 2012 to 2016, it did market research into TV and online shopping. And they have also report on the assessment of market domination and the market power, especially the competition issue in the digital economy. That's one. Besides the organizations department, we built one task force for digital economy on competition competency this year. This task force also has 2 main tasks. The first one is information collection and analysis, and hosting the forum to identify domestic and international competition issues, and also doing international competition communications. Second one is they want to publish a report for the digital economy. For example, our issue is the current Fair Trade Act applicable to competitive concern arising from the digital economy, or the new regulation or new thinking we need.
Go to question.
Yeah, next one. Yeah, we go to the next slide. So the future outlook is we have 3 points: innovation and regulation. As you know, innovation is seen as one of the main drivers of the communication. So how to build construct a legal framework for such an environment is very important. Some experts even suggest that facing to so new phenomenon, we must be humble. We must humble because we don't know many things about this phenomenon. In fact, second one is we are promoting the basic law for the digital economy, and the next one is competition literacy, such as developing competition culture for friendly environment for the thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very much. I want to ask to Mr. Discover.
Can you please?
My name is Mala. I'm a law student at Islamic State University, Jakarta. As I know, ACCC have the authority to enforce the Australian antitrust law against international merger that held outside Australia, but have the impact to the Australian market. The question is, based on the ACCC practice, what obstacles that ACCC must faces on international merger enforcement, and how the ACCC resolves that problem? And the second question is, why Australia not use the mandatory notification system on merger, acquisition, and consolidation? Is that just voluntary notification, not just compound the ACCC while we know the market is so widespreadly, not just only conventional business, but also e-commerce. Thank you.
Two questions. Do you want to directly answer?
Sure. Well, this microphone's obviously working. So because we have a common law system, we don't make administrative decisions. If there's going to be a merger, to breach the law, it needs to have been completed and we need to take it to court or get an interim injunction. So we have voluntary pre-merger notification, which allows us to identify if we have any issues before the merger happens. We've got detailed guidelines, but there's no sort of hard and fast rules about when it will or won't require notification or when it will or won't SLC. I think your first question was around international mergers. I'd be happy to. We cooperate a lot with our international colleagues to understand the operation of companies in their country and our country, and if we think that there's different issues in our market than applies in other markets, then we might get involved and might have different remedies. But I didn't quite follow the question. I'll be happy to give you more detail afterwards.
The important things also mentioned here, how we define the market. Relevant market will be a problem in this digital economy, and also related to the market power and needs cooperations among the competition agency from across the world. Because there are many things that will happen at cross borders, possibility of using big data and other sources. So, because of the time, once again, please apologize. So we cannot make question and answers so far. Thank you for the distinguished panelists. Please give a big applause for them.
Thank you. So ladies and gentlemen and distinguished guests, we will now arrive at third panel discussion. And the topic will be Insight and Proposal for Indonesia and the region in dealing with competition and enforcement in online platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Yosef Rizal Damuri.
Thank you very much for your kind and comprehensive introductions, Ms. MC. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. We have now two of our speakers. Hopefully, we will have other speakers to come later on. Mr. Alex Chandra, and also representative for coordinating Ministry of Economic Affairs of Indonesia. But I think we should proceed with our sessions this afternoon, and these sessions I think will be also quite interesting. at least as interesting as other sessions, the previous session. Before going on, perhaps I should also mention something about what we're trying to find in these sessions. But before that, I'd like also to mention a little thing about the online platforms, internet in economy, and also how the progress and the developments of those things. During the dawn of the internet's use for economic purpose, actually it's in the mid-1990s, one of the prominent economists at the time, Hal Varians, wrote an article, I think one of the first article on the use of internet in economic issues. It's called FAQ of Economic Internet. Frequently asked questions. And then in this article appear in the Journal of Economics Perspective, one of a prestigious journal actually. He lays down issues related to internet and how the internet also affect economic activities. And most of the issues at that time were actually related to the infrastructure. How even the competition issues related to internet were actually were at that time related more to the infrastructure. How the internet would be priced, how internet would be divided or would be distributed. This kind of thing, mostly on the infrastructure. But he also mentions about the issues of internet in the economic activities. What are issues relevant to the use of internet in commercial activities, including in the online platform. It's kind of like a visionary writing actually. But he didn't mention anything about the competition policy or competition issues related to online platforms such as e-commerce. Maybe during that time, we didn't know actually, or anybody didn't know what kind of competition issues that arise if we use internet very intensively with in the economic activities. After more than 20 years, we've seen that the issues have been evolving and become more complicated. When we're talking about competition issues in the commercial activities of using internet, then we have to find balances between very diverse perspective, very diverse interests. And during the last two sessions, we actually already discussed a lot about all those problems. We discussed also a lot about how the potential and the challenges in tackling the competition issues in e-commerce or in other online platforms. Now we're going to try to look at more concrete proposal, perhaps in this session. Hopefully we can come up with more concrete proposals and more concrete insight on how to deal with competition issues and also competition enforcement in online platforms. We have with us two experts or two experts from competition authorities that can share the experience from developed countries, from Japan and from Australia, and we supposed to also have someone from the sector itself, which is the Indonesia E-commerce Associations. Unfortunately, Mr. Alexander perhaps still have problems to come here. But hopefully we will have him later on. And another person that we also share the view is from Commissioner of KPPU. And we can also discuss in detail what is the insight and proposal for Indonesia, for developing countries, learning from what happens already, and how the developed countries such as Australia and Japan deal with these competition issues. Without further ado, I would like to ask all the panelists to present their view and present their perspective. Perhaps we don't really have much time, so I will try to limit the presentations from our panelists for 10 minutes each, so we can have more time for the discussions later on. Maybe you still have many other questions that still lingering around, and you didn't have time, you didn't have chance to ask during the previous sessions, then this is the time also. Hopefully, I can provide you more time to discuss about all those questions. Thank you very much. Okay, since we don't have Mr. Alexandra here yet, then I would like to start our sessions by calling Miss Barbara Wise. She's a representative of the New South Wales or NSW government, or especially from the Point-to-Point Transport Commission on this state of New South Wales. And the title or the theme that Ms. Wise will deliver this afternoon is disruption and innovation. How to better regulate. You have 10 minutes to share your view.
Thank you very much to the KPPU for inviting me to speak today. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start by saying I'm actually not a competition regulator. I'm a safety regulator. I'm a transport safety regulator, in fact. But I did go through a process to reform the way we regulate transport in New South Wales, and particularly taxis and hire cars and people like Gojek and Uber and so forth that we have here in Indonesia. We did go through a process, and I'm just going to take some time to explain what we did, some of the things we found, and how we've reformed our regulatory framework since then. If you could change the slide for me, please, thanks. So, in Australia, like many places around the world, we had a very traditional taxi system. It was really made up of taxis, so the vehicles with lights on the roof and you can hang them down in the street, and a traditional hire car market, which is more like your limousines and so forth. It was a very tightly regulated market. Others have reflected on that today already, that the markets most ripe for disruptions are those which are most heavily regulated. I'd point out by saying that in New South Wales, as in most states in Australia and in many countries, the regulator looked not just at safety but also regulated aspects of customer service. It doubly regulated where other regulators were already taking care of some aspects of the business. A key feature of the taxi industry in New South Wales was that the barriers to entry were very high. So a taxi licence would cost a lot, and there were restrictions on supply, and also the barriers to entry for any of the other market participants were also very high, particularly for the companies which make the most money out of their whole instance. So the taxi networks, the brand, the customer, the brand of the taxi company, the barriers to entry were very, very high. There was the structure of the market there was in fact prescribed by the legislation. If you didn't fit the business model that was described in the legislation, you basically couldn't participate. This had all kinds of effects. The industry structure also influenced. The two influenced each other. The industry structure influenced the legislation, and the legislation influenced the industry structure. Over the course of the 1990s and 2000s, there were a dominant player really began to emerge, and this player, CapCharge, has in fact had plenty of interactions with the ACCC, our competition regulator in Australia. They became verdict. So it started out being owned by a taxi company, CapCharge, and this taxi company, because banks found taxi drivers to be undesirable people to do business with, they wouldn't process payments. So we heard Gojek talking about using your phone to pay for everything in the future. In the 80s, as the use of credit cards became more popular, the taxi industry, Australians are early adopters, and that went for credit card payments as well. Banks did not like, thought taxi drivers were too risky, and so a taxi company decided to set up a payment system. The reason I'm taking the time to go through this is because it quickly became a very vertically integrated company. They did all kinds of things and had a very dominant presence across all of the Australian taxi industry through dominating the payment system. And they were able to get into all aspects of the taxi industry by doing that. They also then had a very strong influence on government in terms of how regulation should be made so that the barriers to entry were very high. The regulatory framework having such high barriers to entry meant that the people in the industry and the fact that the government regulated quality and everything else meant that the people in this industry spent most of the time concentrating on keeping other people out rather than on developing their own business. And the way the industry was structured meant that they had no incentive to care about customers at all. In the most part, the big taxi companies weren't making money directly from the customers. They were getting it through other people in the supply chain, and the only person who was getting money out of the customer directly was the driver. So there were lots of people in the supply chain who had absolutely no incentive to care about customer service in what is frankly a service industry. The government they basically took on all the risk for the industry. They managed risk for the industry, whether that was safety or also customer outcomes. So government vetted all the drivers, it vetted all of the people who owned the vehicles. Companies, the big brands weren't doing any of this. The brand itself was not doing any work. Many taxi companies, even up until very recently, did not even have a customer feedback system in place because the government was doing that for them. So it was a very, it just didn't function like a proper market because the industry itself had no reason, due to a lack of competition, as also due to quirks in the regulation, didn't have to do anything of its own. So of course it was ripe for disruption. Uber did come along in 2014, so in Australia it was Uber. And because the regulation was so prescriptive, Uber itself was not actually breaking the law. All of its drivers were, but Uber itself, because it didn't fit the regulatory framework, the regulator could not actually take any action against Uber itself. Could you change the slide, please? Yeah, thanks. So Uber entered in UberX, so as someone else indicated earlier, we did have booking apps, third-party booking for taxis that were just doing that. But UberX, so people driving their own cars and taking customers, entered in April 2014. Like most jurisdictions, you have to be mindful of things like elections and the electoral cycle. It was just not the right timing for the government to do anything immediately upon entry because, in terms of reform, because of where we were in the electoral cycle. As soon as the election was out of the way, there was an independent task force put in place, given a very broad terms of reference and a 4-month time frame to take a look at the regulatory framework and how it could be reviewed. 4 months is not a very long time when you're looking at a whole regulatory framework. There are examples around the world, and including around Australia, where people have taken 2 years to put a regulatory framework. We knew we just did not have that kind of time to do that work, so it was a lot of work done in a very short time frame. And the government wanted the issues sorted because it could see that it was not tenable to keep dragging it on in a way that's happened in many places. I just want to take a minute to describe some of the work we did. It was very important to have a transparent process around the policy development on this. We designed some things very carefully to ensure that we heard from customers. We knew we would hear, Bruce talked before about doing a survey and getting some very skewed results because of the people who were interested in responding to the survey. We knew we weren't going to get the voice of taxi customers in a clear way using traditional methods where they make written submissions and so forth. So we actually did some focus groups with people who were making very clear questions around what was important to them in terms of government intervention and what was actually working and not working under the old system.
This way.
Yep.
Do you have it?
Okay, sure. So after the 4-month period, could you change the slide, please? Thanks. The key changes to that the task force, independent task force, looked at was it simplified the regulation. The booked market was opened up entirely. So one of the key principles that the task force focused on was there are two markets here. There's a booked market where, if you're making a booking, you're actually hoping someone will return custom. You get them back again and they will book with you again. And then there's what in Australia we call a rank and hail market, where it's anonymous, where you're flagging someone down in the street, you don't know the driver, you're probably never going to see that driver again, and so forth. And we recognised that there were different risks associated with those two markets. In a booked market, there's a record. In the rank and hail market, it's anonymous. So you need some different protections for customers because of that. So what that meant was we flipped the regulatory framework so it wasn't taxis and hire cars anymore, but booked and unbooked. So all of the measures we put in place for taxis meant that if it was a booked taxi, then the same levels of safety and consumer protection regulation needed to be in place as for their competitors in the booked market, whether that was Uber or a hire car or a limousine. So in that sense, we've heard the level playing field a lot today. We level the playing field for taxis in the booked market. So their protections around that are higher levels of safety in particular apply to only when they're doing the anonymous rank and hail work. We do have still some maximum fares for taxis, but that only applies if you're flagging them down in the street or taking them to the taxi rank, because you can't really shop around in that instance. I just want to say a couple of other things. In terms of the regulation, we shifted to a risk-based regulatory framework, and we gave the brands, the people who are making the most money out of this, whether that's Uber or CapCharge or whoever, they got given accountability for safety outcomes, and the focus of the regulator is now on those companies, not on the drivers. We also deregulated all aspects of quality. That was up to the market. So if you do not like your taxi, then you complain to the company, not to the government. One final thing I would say is that the government recognised that by flipping this whole regulatory framework on its head, is it needed to recognise that transition is important for the incumbent industry. It's an old industry because they'd been focused on keeping out other people. They hadn't done any succession planning in their own businesses. And so there's a natural, we needed to assist them with business advice. There's been some financial assistance in order to help them adjust. And also a strong education campaign so that they can actually start to think like businesses and in a competitive environment again. I think that's probably all I'll touch on at the moment, although I will say, I did want to say that what we've done and some of the effects, just briefly, there has been an impact on the incumbents. It's not huge, they haven't devastated anybody. No one has gone out of business in New South Wales yet because of the entry of new markets, so people are waking up and seeing how it's going. And of course, all of the unmet demand that was there is now being met. there are people who are, it's no longer difficult to get a ride when you need one in New South Wales. I'll leave it at that for now. I'd be happy to talk to anyone afterwards if they have any questions.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing with us your experience, Ms. Wise. As we know already, that the challenge is actually on how to balance between the innovations, the competitions, consumer protection and consumer interest, perhaps, so that perhaps we can learn a lot from your presentations. But in order to know more about how to balance the regulations, the competition issues, consumer protection, and all other things, including also innovations, we now quite lucky to have Mr. Alexander, who will share with us from the perspective of the player, from the perspective of the business sector itself, on how the government, including also the competition authorities, perhaps, also in Indonesia, to see or to provide regulatory frameworks on the online platform. You have 10 minutes to share your view, Mr. Alexander. Please, the stage is yours.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really sorry if I came late, because I just come back from the Minister of Telco and Informatics speaking about safe harbor. So, as I mentioned, Indonesia is, well, you might say, people see it as a sexy lady. People are trying to develop e-commerce in Indonesia more and more and more. One of the key regulations that needs to be taken is the safe harbor policy. Because, next slide please. Because we believe that e-commerce will fuel the Indonesian dream. We believe that e-commerce will help develop the SMEs, since we will also believe that there are lots of things that will happen if we develop the SMEs through online digital platform. So, next slide please. But first thing first, I would like to talk about what is IDEA itself. IDEA is established in 2012. As per now, we have 310 members. But next slide, please. We have 310 members that is consist not only the e-commerce, but also its whole ecosystem. So, like the banking, the payment gateways, the search engine, basically everyone that is connected with the e-commerce. Next slide, please. So, speaking of e-commerce, we have, as we all know, that e-commerce business model is sometimes kind of mix up between one business model and other business model. So, I'll take, for example, Kaskus, which is one of the, I would say, the early e-commerce in Indonesia, is actually a mix-up between a forum and a classified ads. Or like Lazada, which is basically a combination between a marketplace and a e-retail. But what is classified ads? What is a marketplace? What is e-retail? In the next slide, I will present the main distinction between those three business models. Because in Indonesia, unlike any other countries, we differentiate e-commerce into these three categories: the classified ads, the marketplace, and the e-retail. So it's kind of different between other countries. Next slide, please. Next. Okay. But before that, I would like to speak about the e-commerce milestone in Indonesia. So it all started in 1994, starting with Indonet, and then in 1999 we already have Kaskus and Bineka.com. Bineka.com started as an online catalog, but now it has evolved into e-retail. And about Kaskus, like I said before, it started as a forum, and now it has evolved into a forum and a classified as. And then in 2001, the government in Indonesia started to think about e-commerce. How are they going to regulate it actually? And in 2005, tokobagus.com, which already became OLX, has been established. In 2006, 3G is established in Indonesia. In 2008, we finally have some kind of regulation stating about internet and its transaction, but I would not say it's the right pace for e-commerce. And in 2009, one of the 3 unicorns in Indonesia, Tokopedia, is established. So from what I heard is we have 3 unicorns in Indonesia right now: Tokopedia, Traveloka, and of course Gojek. So seeing in so short period of time that we already have 3 unicorns, I personally believe that e-commerce will build the Indonesian dream, and I do hope that for all the participants here, please believe that e-commerce will help your country's dream. And continue to the slide. In 2011, we got Blibli, which is basically e-retail, Ticket.com, which is also one of the main players in ticketing and online airline services. And in 2012, we got Traveloka, and the idea is just established, and we got Lazada and Zalora entering Indonesia. In 2013, the 4Gs are online in Indonesia. In 2014, we got Belanja. The interesting about Belanja is actually a joint venture between the state-owned company and a personal company. So it's a kind of interesting to speak about Belanja. So another thing about Elefania is also one of the, I would say, a pivot point for XL, one of the major telco companies in Indonesia. They start to enter the e-commerce player. So there are a lot of things, there are lots of A/B testing that is currently happening for all the companies in Indonesia. And in 2015, we already got Matahari Mall. Gojek, like I said, in a very, very short time of period, he is able to become a unicorn one. And the second thing is he is able to change the whole behavior of its user. In like 2 or 3 years ago, we basically wouldn't imagine that we could hail our motorbike on the street and get our needs to be fulfilled by them. And in 2015,
you have 2 minutes.
Okay,
If you can.
Okay, I think I'll go fast. Okay. And in 2015, Tokobagus and Beriaga joined as OLX. Okay, this is Indonesia. As you can see, the geographical itself is a main challenge for the e-commerce player. I mean, how do you connect from the most eastern part of Indonesia, and how do you connect to the most western part of Indonesia with a cheap and fast logistics? So next slide, please. This is one of the main key challenges in Indonesia. So we have the infrastructure, we have the cybersecurity, we got the funding, tax, talents, and logistics. So we have that kind of problems. So next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. Starting with the infrastructure, I would, like I stated before, the infrastructure in Indonesia is quite bad. How do you make a delivery from the most western part of Indonesia to the eastern part of Indonesia very cheap and fast? How do you do it? Is it going to be with aeroplane? That will cost a lot. Or how are you going to do it with, let's say, ship? I guess that will take quite a long time. So this is kind of things that we need to think about. Another thing about infrastructure is, we don't have this one big infrastructure of data on who's. People say that we have 59 million of SMEs, but how do we calculate it? How much are the people that is already connected to the online? So we have this fracture of data that doesn't speak to one of each other. Next slide, please. And cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not a big. People think cybersecurity is not a big thing in Indonesia. When you say, when you ask the people in Indonesia, do they think about cybersecurity when they purchase online? Basically, that would be after the price and the easiness, then they might think about the cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is not a big thing in Indonesia in their mindset. So next slide, please. The next about funding itself. So funding is also a big problem in Indonesia. So you might get very easily funding for seed and angel investors, Series A, Series B, but then after the Series B, that kind of be kind of hard if you want to get some funding in Indonesia. First, the mindset is not that really, I would say, Indonesian conglomerates doesn't really believe in Indonesia. Why? Because for e-commerce, you have to have a very, very high, very large amount of money, and then you have to invest for like 5, 10, 12 years until you, at the very least, will see a bit of revenue. So this kind of mindset is also hindering the government to invest in e-commerce. Next slide, please. The tax. Where should I start? So, we are in the mid-balance of how to decide. Are we going to tax the e-commerce player and then in a short period we will get quite an amount of money for the country, or in the long term, we don't tax them at first, but we will let them grow, and maybe in the long term, the digital economy in Indonesia will grow. So the government is still finding this sweet spot on how do they going to tax the e-commerce player. So that's another problem to solve. Next slide, please. Talent. It's very hard to find talent in Indonesia, especially a very, very good developer, a very, very good CTO, and it's also very, very hard to find, let's say, other talents, let's say in marketing, legal. It's very, very small amount of people that is really, really specialized in e-commerce. So that's why you could see that several companies actually have to import talents from outside Indonesia. So next, logistics. Like I mentioned again, the logistics in Indonesia is expensive comparing to China, where my friend could buy a block from China, which will be delivered in 2 weeks and only cost like $1 for the cost business itself. In Jakarta only, $1 could only give you, you could only send a document from East Jakarta to West Jakarta, and that's that. So, if you want to, let's say, deliver things from the east part to the most west part of Indonesia, well, you can imagine how much the cost would be. And next. But there is hope. I believe in my president. There is a new hope for e-commerce in Indonesia. I believe that our president have a vision for that. our president have to believe that Indonesia could be the digital energy of Asia. And I do hope that all the people in here could also have the very huge vision of it. Your country also could be the digital energy of Asia. But first, how do you get it? How do you get it and become the digital energy of Asia? First, you will need the roadmap. So, in 2017, July 21st, our president has signed the roadmap e-commerce. Why is it so important? Because it will determine the future of Indonesian dream from starting now until 2019. They will develop on what to regulate and what not to regulate, what needs to be chopped down, what needs to be added for all the problems that I mentioned before. I believe that's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alex Chandra from IDEA to explain to us about the challenges and obstacles of e-commerce, and also for sharing with us your optimism on the digital economy of Indonesia, including also on the e-commerce. But there are many concerns also about this digital economy, about online platform, whatever you call it, from the point of view of competition policy. One of the concerns is that many people already discussed and talked about is that the winner not usually or often takes winner takes all principle that often comes or observed in the digital era of economy. Then here we have Mr. Toshiyuki Nambu that perhaps can shed a light for us on competition issues, including also how to cooperate at the international level, because the title of our sessions is not only about Indonesia but also about the region. Perhaps some issues as related to competition issues can be also dealt more efficiently at regional level with the international corporations. Mr. Nabusan is the Senior Deputy Secretary General of Japan Fair Trade Commission, JFTC. So please, Mr. Nabu, you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much for kind introduction. It is very great honor for me to have a chance to participate in this forum, again as a panelist following the first forum, which was held on September 2015. Today, for the topic of this panel, I would like to talk about 3 points. First is the current situation of digital economy and disruptive innovation in Japan. Secondly, recent efforts by the JFTC on the advocacy and implementation of competition policy and law. And thirdly, issues on cooperation and potential future challenges. These days, you know that digital economy and disruptive innovation have been spread widely across the border, both in developed economies. So new businesses derived from the disruptive innovation in online platforms are taking the place of the traditional business infrastructure. So accordingly, consumers can enjoy a variety of goods and services more easily than before. Next slide, please. Okay. In Japan, like other countries, the digital economy evolving very much rapidly. Looking at the e-commerce market in Japan in the context of the business to consumer has expanded from $70 billion in 2010 to $135 billion in 2016. On the contrary, compared to other countries, new businesses utilizing disruptive innovation, such as Uber or Airbnb, are facing challenges in doing business in the Japanese market. Also, new technologies like payment system are not popular among Japanese consumers. Why haven't such kinds of new business technologies developed so far in Japanese market? One of the reasons is that traditional business infrastructure and services in Japan have been highly advanced and consumers are very much accustomed to the usefulness of the current level of technologies and business infrastructures. But I have to mention that in Japan, related government regulations are very much strictly enforced. Therefore, Uber cannot introduce its ride-share business in Japan because of taxi regulation. This is the same in the case of the Chinese Taipei. Airbnb cannot extend its room share businesses using private houses in Japan because of hotel regulations. So it can be said that in Japan is rather behind the world trend in terms of the introduction of disruptive innovations and actual businesses. So next slide, please. So the critical role of competition policy in the digital economy is to promptly remove the anti-competitive activities while not discouraging innovative efforts and promote innovation by maintaining and promoting a competitive environment. So based on those ideas, the GFTC has recently done various efforts in the area of digital economy. Firstly, on October 2016, the GFTC has established a contact point in the Investigation Bureau for obtaining information related to infringement of the Anti-Monopoly Act, the Japanese Commission law, in the digital economy and information technology. On June 2017 this year, the GFTC dealt with a case regarding so-called the MFN rules of Amazon Japan. In this case, Amazon Japan proposed to take voluntary measures to eliminate the MFN rules. The GFTC reviewed the proposal and decided to close the investigation of this case. Also, in June 2017, the study group on data and competition policy, which was established within the GFTC, made a public report which clarifies issues of competition policy and the Anti-Monopoly Act relating to accumulation and utilization for big data. In addition, the GFTC is now considering to conduct an extensive survey on the area of digital economy in the near future. Next slide, please. So, disruptive innovation promotes competition in terms of giving new alternatives to consumers and causing competitive pressure on the existing business and technologies. That brings benefits for consumers and leads to economic growth. Therefore, it is important to review existing regulations which may hinder introduction of disruptive innovation and to promote a competitive market environment where new businesses utilizing disruptive innovation can enter into the market. So I am sure that competition authorities should continue competition advocacy for the review of current sector regulations which prohibit realizing new business utilizing disruptive innovation. In terms of enforcement, I don't think that new or special laws and regulations are necessary in order to deal with anti-competitive activities in online platforms areas. Competition authority should address those cases by making the best use of existing laws and regulations. Now, I would like to touch on the issues of cooperation in cross-border enforcement in the digital economy. As I said earlier, the digital economy and the disruptive innovations are spreading widely across the board. So, in dealing with competition policy issues in the digital economy, exchange of experience among competition authorities is important and useful for efficient and effective advocacy and implementation of competition policies. So it is very much useful to utilize the convocation of such as this kind of international forum where competition authorities from various economies got together and share experiences of how to cope with competition issues in this economy. So in cooperation and coordination of the enforcement of the competition law against actual cases in online platforms, Commission authorities should make the best use of the existing current international cooperation frameworks such as EPFTA, bilateral or multilateral cooperation agreement, and MOU. So as long as those existing cooperation framework function well, I don't think that new or special cooperation framework is necessary for case investigation in online platforms and digital economy. So lastly, I would like to touch upon potential future challenges. So in the digital economy, many platforms operated by the dominant business tend to be so-called multifaceted, continue combining multiple markets, and new businesses utilizing disruptive innovation are expected to emerge one after another. So this trend will most likely continue into the future, and new challenges for Commission policy, such as issues relating to big data or algorithms, etc., will inevitably occur. So Commission authorities tend to make continuous efforts in international cooperation for tackling those new challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, the last speaker is Mr. Nawal Messi. For sure, we all know Pak Nawal Messi. Pak Nawal Messi, I think, will talk about Indonesia and how we can learn from all the presentations that we have perhaps today. Please, Pak Nawal, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Very good afternoon. By inviting many experts from many other countries here, I suppose we will listen actually, but let me try exploring the areas that happen in the area of competition policy. This area is very complex, so summarizing the policy areas within 10 minutes is very difficult actually, but let me start by stating that we need economic growth. We have a problem. We can solve many problems by improving economic growth. And if you want to sustainable growth, you need to have sustainable, sustaining, improve productivity, and the necessary condition to have improvement on the productivity is you need to improve your efficiency. And one condition to sustainably improve your efficiency is you have to have innovation, continue innovation day to day, over time. And let me talk, I talk the story of one taxi, full-time conventional taxi driver, operating 24 hours a day. In average, how many hours the passenger sit behind you every day? In average, we can say 3 to 3.5 hours a day within 24 hours. In the other day, I talked to a full-time online taxi driver. Same question. You have a passenger every day. How many hours in average you have passenger behind you within 24 hours? And said average 8 to 9 hours. I'm trying to say that in comparison, this is not research but just an idea. In comparison, productivity, we are talking about productivity. Productivity is double, even more comparison. But I think if we are talking about competition policy, government policy framework, we are not talking only productivity, but we are concerned with things like probably employment, probably balancing the interests of consumers and producers, and of course some other consideration. Let me start by, as we know, online business platform consists of wide range of business activity, and which consists probably starting from online advertising platforms, marketplaces, search engine, content outlets, navigation, distribution, platform, communication service, many other things. They share similar characteristics, including, I think, the use of information technology to facilitate interaction between users, collection, network, effect, and make use of platform with most to others. Although they are varied in nature, I think they are all have similar ecosystem with the same basic structure. It's comprised of at least 4 types of players. The first is the owners of the platform that control intellectual property right and governance. The second one is providers, who serve as the platform interface with users. And the third one is producers, which create their offering, including here in small and medium-sized producers, including conventional non-online users. You are not only talking about network effect, but you are talking about multi-stakeholders, which is at least 4 stakeholders I mentioned before. Gentlemen, let's know that the rapid growth in number and type of online business has produced many benefits to consumers and firms. It provides consumers with a variety of choices, easy access of products and services, much more than offline business can provide, and in most of the cases with much lower prices, and sometimes more attractive delivery mechanism. You don't pay the cost of delivery. With that network effect, it gives firm access to potentially much larger consumer and much larger geographic area, but most important thing, it reduces overall transaction costs. And this is the way, probably one thing, the way in which this capacity provide efficiency and much other things. Of course, if you see in this side, we can conclude online platform business provide many benefits, not only for consumer but also for growing the industry, or for growing the services. However, there are also create some potential problem in the area of competition, in the area of consumer protection. One example is neutrality. People debating about neutrality of technology, and many authorities, I think, some people around the world are trying to avoid what we call neutrality. Sometimes you are thinking about whether the big one might become to be dominant in the market, but sometimes you have to see that the free of charge of a platform might become to be faster to dominate the market because they are free. Sometimes competition authority just looking at the IPR, just looking at the patented platform instead of looking at the free of charge of platform. But in the many instances, the free of charge platform sometimes dominate the market. And here we have to be very careful in looking at the problem. First one. The second one, in many parts of the world, this kind of conferences, many experts say that within the rise of online business platform, digital economy, and the whole settings, the whole policy instrument, the whole technical analysis will change. And I will say no. Many of conventional technique tools are still fairly relevant to use in analyzing issues related to companies related to the online platform. Why? Because the most important thing is you have to whether you are whether you are successful to identify the industry is single, double, or multi-sided market. If you successfully identify that and the connection with other industry, then I think almost all tool of analysis are still relevant in the analyzing this competition. The third one is the problem of big data. Sometimes people argue that competition related issues occur because access of opportunity to use big data between big and small players. So the problem is related to the issues of level of playing field. And every conference like this, I think people are talking about big data problem, big data concern. The other, and I think second, also Indonesia is concerned about pricing policy. There are many, almost every day, people went to KPPU asking about whether one player doing predatory pricing. And this is the area that authority, competition authority have to work hard to see whether there are predatory pricing done. Because people are concerned about why one player can provide really cheap price compared to other player. The other thing is about consumers, privacy policy, the use of consumers' data for other businesses, non-core businesses. And this is a really problem in terms in the connection between competition and consumer protection policy. And therefore, there is really an urgent need to coordinate between competition authority and consumer protection policy. Ladies and gentlemen, instead of going into further details, I prefer to, because the time is very limited, I prefer to explore the major principle, policy principle of the area. For us, for competition authority, there is a need to develop neutral policy framework, competitive, adjustable, transparent policy, enable for portraying transition to accommodate change in the business model. I think the most urgent need for government, including KPPU, to provide is a basic policy framework that could portray the transition from conventional to online to digital economy, which is the policy itself should be adjustable from time to time in accordance with the change in the business environment. If you agree on that, there is no need to stop one kind of business models. There is no need for the national government to ask government to stop online platform in many areas of Indonesia. There is no need to say that this is very dangerous. One thing that you need to propose to develop is neutral policy framework, provide equal access of opportunity for business, that in the medium and long run can portray the transition from conventional to the digital economy. Because you cannot stop innovation. You cannot stop the development of innovative business in the future. What you can do is prepare people. And in the case of Indonesia, I think there are two major homework for government. The first is educate people to increase internet literacy. As I think right now, internet literacy is less than 40% of the population, and this is very big job. If you are doing that, you will lose. You will lose. The second one is the problem of quality of network, telecommunication. If there is no improvement in the quality of telecommunication in the future, and then we will become together because of globalization of online platform. Ladies and gentlemen, so again, let me conclude my speech. Policy frameworks will provide equal access opportunity for business business while providing driving forces for the industry to be competitive. But we have also remembered that there should be enough for conventional business for adjustment, and therefore we need transitional policy framework. In fact, our problem for the future, I remember one research conducted by international organization that in the next 2 decades, 50% of employment will be replaced by the digital instrument, digital business. And that's so if you are not prepared, there is no transitional program that Indonesia and some other countries, developing countries, might use. Therefore, again, transitional program doing by government will be very, very important. I think that's the basic framework of the policy that we have to provide, and I will end my presentation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for a comprehensive take on the issues. It's interesting, but Nawir also mentions about the many issues related to competition, especially with the online platform. It's actually remains the same old issues coming over and over again. Although maybe the nature of the problems, the nature of the issues here becomes much more intensive, much more, the magnitude is bigger, and also the time, the period of the change is pretty fast. So that what the government needs to do is to accommodate and to facilitate the transitions and to find the balance, the existing industry. So how to put it in balance?
So it was very important for the government to make sure that the incumbents were given as much opportunity as the new players. We heard before, earlier today, how in many places around the world there had been an extra new light touch add-on for the new players while everybody else had to maintain their existing regulations. We did something very different to that. We actually we removed all the barriers to entry for everyone, for the incumbents. We removed a lot of regulatory costs for the incumbents, so it made it much easier for people at the front end. But importantly, we made the safety accountabilities, because that's why we regulated transport, for the safety of customers. And we gave the accountability evenly to all of the companies in terms of outcomes for safety, recognising, as I said before, you're hailing a vehicle down, there's a different risk level compared to when you're walking around. So it was recognising those two different things.
Thank you very much. And then move to Mr. Nama. You, in your presentations, you mentioned about the report on utilization and collection of big data. This is very interesting, actually. Like several weeks ago, the Economist, the magazine, The Economist, even put it that the data is the new oil. In relation to that, perhaps you can elaborate a little bit on the report of collecting and utilizing big data.
So the report recognizes the development of the IT or IoT or AI, and it emphasizes the importance of the collecting and utilization of the big data in order to improve its product and services. On the contrary, sometimes platforms or big companies and tend to restrict the collections of the data data, and it may impede the competitors to join the best market. And also, it mentioned the importance of the combinations of M&A with regard to investigation of M&A with regard to considering turnover, not only the turnover of the monetary turnover, but also the turnover of the data. It's important. This kind of discussion has been conducted in
dekat-dekat sama kaki ya, Mas.
Is there a plan to put some kind of regulations on the utilization or collections of big data in Japan?
No regulations. Continue effort to investigate and actual activities emerged.
Thank you. To Mr. Alexander, perhaps you can say something. Your suggestions or your recommendations to the government institution related to the e-commerce in Indonesia, or perhaps even more specifically on the competition issues. If you can say something briefly for that.
Sure. First, one thing, we need a very light touch regulation. It's still a long road for everyone, so let us wait and see, and let's make a regulation that is one light touch and a regulation that could nurture the ecosystem itself. The second thing is, it doesn't always winner takes all. It's sometimes, I will speak about the three horses. First, the zebra. The second thing is the unicorn, and the third one is the Pegasus. The first one is the zebra. The zebra kind of type of company only focusing on delivering services, not going for the valuation, basically surviving and doing what their business are. The second thing is the unicorn. They are basically pursuing the $1 billion valuation. And the third one is the Pegasus, which is basically a unicorn that is already evolved. He's already being a unicorn, but he is able to spread their wings to develop new business models. So, what I see is actually sometimes people in the world are kind of unicorn drunk, I would say. It is time to focus not just for the unicorns but also the zebra. Which do you prefer to have? 100 zebras in 1 year, or 1 unicorn in 1 year, or 1 Pegasus in 10 years? The choice is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the analogy. Hopefully, those horses can live together happily ever after. Nabil, you have something else to say? Perhaps elaborating a little bit about the transition one. You mentioned about transitions, and then if you can give some kind of prescriptions on this transition, how to deal and how to wave the transition, riding the wave of transition. Please.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, the benefit of innovation technology on business and economy is very, very wide, very, very good, benefit many people, many sectors, many to the economy. And our job, in that sense, is managing the effect, negative effect, unintended effect. There are two unintended effects here. The first one is those issues related to competition authority, which is related to issues of dominant position, merger acquisition, predatory pricing, and some other things, and including related to the use of big data, and therefore it needs to be put in the intensive monitoring program in that sense. First one. There are other unintended effects that do not fall under competition authority, and as I mentioned before, that kind of things might fall under government. However, the policy is, in fact, shifting from conventional to digital economy might provide unemployment effect that the government should consider about. And one job that the government should do, I refer back to my position with the taxi driver, that we need to involve in that kind of technology, but government, the state should provide training for us to pursue transition, to involve in the transition process. The other group of people also need to be involved in the transition again, unless include your government, including the e-commerce, small and medium enterprises. Many of them are not even understand really what is internet is. So internet literacy is very important if you want to go with. And then I think the guy who talked about the e-commerce should be put it on the roadmap if you want to develop the e-commerce. So two transitional programs: improving internet literacy, and the second one is improving the quality of telecommunication. Is a major part. Of course, other supporting systems should be also improved.
I'm not going to summarize the sessions because we discussed about a lot of things basically, but I believe that you agree with me that this is a very informative sessions and a lot of information that we can gather from our resources, from our resource person here, from our speakers here, and this hopefully this is also going to be inspiring sessions for all of us to find solutions and to find recommendations for policy related to the online platforms. For all of that, I invite you to give a round of applause for all four speakers here, and also for your participations in the sessions. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite Bapak Muhammad Syarkawi Rauf, the chairman of KPPU, to deliver his closing remarks.
Good afternoon, friends from international competition authorities, distinguished panelists, session chairs, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for attending the second Jakarta International Competition Forum. It is always an honor for having you here at the conference. We highly appreciate your shared enthusiasm to participate and contribute at this conference to its very end. Your attendance and support will always be our energy to move forward and keep this conference for years to come. During today's conference, we heard from many voices that have a stake in the future of disruptive innovation in online platform, including our entrepreneur research institute, the association representing e-commerce community, policymaker, and competition law enforcers. They all share a common interest to this topic and taught us many important lessons, which we can think and adapt to our very own practices. The first panel of competition in e-commerce and online platform, we heard about the progress of e-commerce and online platforms in Indonesia, how the private sector keep to innovate and anticipating the future challenges in online platform, policy environment surrounding online platform, and how the business and competition agency respond to the opportunity and challenges of the dynamic environment. The second panel of issues and challenges for competition enforcement in online platform. We heard about the perspective on practical competition issues in the online platform from many angles, like common issues, enforcement challenges, the merger in e-commerce, and challenges in economic analysis of the digital market. What important is, the session will help us to recommend the strategies for the competition authorities and regulators to change how they shall execute their prevention mechanism and enforcement, or how to set the intervention. The third panel of insight and proposal for Indonesia and the region in dealing with competition and enforcement in online platforms. We highlighted the best solution for competition agency and regulator in balancing the promotion of competition with the creation of innovation opportunities, strategies to prevent unlawful behavior and protect consumer interests, ways to create supportive regulatory environment to online platform, and recommended approaches for further development of online platform and e-commerce in Indonesia. The most important outcome of this conference is for us to be able to see how Indonesia should build its policy framework in supporting the business growth in the online platform while creating a balance between innovation, regulation, and competition. The last statement from Mr. Nawir Messi, how Indonesia managed the transition from conventional business to online platform of digital economy by promoting by creating policy that create the same opportunity with the new business model and facilitate transformation of conventional business to digital one. Lastly, we turn to all of the panelists and session chairs to brief us on this interesting and important topic. Your insight were truly remarkable, and I convinced that we know the best our digital market in promoting our economic growth. I hope this conference to expand our network and bring insight on the provided three main perspectives of disruptive innovation and competition policy that I mentioned in my opening remark this morning. Before I conclude, I would like to express on behalf of us our deepest gratitude to the Coordinating Minister of Economic Affairs, the Minister of Communication and Information Technology, business communities, research institutes, and international competition enforcers to provide endless support to this conference, and my team at the Secretariat for the hospitality and excellent arrangement. I also thank officials and organizers who helped make this biennial conference a great success. Please join us again in our next Jakarta International Competition Forum in 2019. I thank you all again and wish you a wonderful afternoon and safe journey home. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muhammad Syarkawi Rauf. So ladies and gentlemen, that closing remarks concludes today's event. And my name is Sufit Kafi. It was an honor for me to be your MC for today. And don't forget, all the materials that you saw on stage is available through USB flash drive, which can be received today at the end of the show outside the committee. Last but not least, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for your participation, and I'll see you again at the next event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
JICF KPPU yang kedua ini sudah sangat bagus, panitianya sudah sangat kompak dan menyiapkan dengan sangat baik.
Karena pemilihan temanya sangat sesuai sekali dengan iklim persaingan usaha saat ini yang dibutuhkan, yakni terkait dengan e-commerce.
Tentunya persaingan yang akan semakin ketat dan diperlukan regulasi untuk mengatur itu. Dengan mengikuti seminar ini, saya harapkan wawasan saya akan bertambah mengenai era yang digital ini dan kompetisi serta aturan-aturan yang ada.
Hanya saja memang kita lihat yang menjadi persoalan ketika berkaitan dengan kompetisi, karena ada kesan mereka yang menguasai teknologi pada akhirnya ketika tidak ada persaingan di antara pelaku usaha, maka pada akhirnya itu akan bisa menyebabkan monopoli.
Pasar untuk online transport itu hanya salah satu pasar yang masalah persaingan cukup krusial ya. Tadi kita bicara mengenai ada orang dari India bicara mengenai misalnya e-commerce, online marketplace, itu semua pasarnya tersendiri-sendiri. Dan langkah sangat baiknya kalau ini ditindaklanjuti dengan membahas secara lebih spesifik.
Di mana e-commerce itu memang merupakan sebuah tantangan besar bagi KPPU. Bisa nggak KPPU untuk mengawasi e-commerce, bukan hanya sekedar konvensional bisnis aja?
Terima kasih atas panitia dari KPPU dan juga dari IO-nya. Semoga kedepannya JICF yang ketiga akan selalu menjadi momen yang penting dan bersejarah di ASEAN, terutama untuk Competition Authority. Terima kasih untuk KPPU sudah menyelenggarakan JICF yang kedua. Semoga kedepannya akan semakin baik. Terima kasih.